Hello, everyone. Kelly here. Today, I'm super excited to have Anna with me from Anna Everwine's Horn and Brass Studio. Anna and I are going to be chatting about how she established some really strong school relationships that grew her horn studio exponentially this fall. And I'm really pumped. This is going to be awesome. Anna, before we get into some questions that I have for you, I would love for you to just take a second to introduce yourself and your studio and just tell us a little bit more about what makes you and your studio unique.
Ah, thank you so much. So, I'm Anna Eberwine, and I teach middle and high school students how to play horn and other brass instruments in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. I love what I do. I get to develop really strong fundamentals from the very get go with my students, and we have fun, learn solos, audition for Allstate, and just have a good time in lessons. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. The excitement and the passion that you have, not only for the work that you're doing, but the student results that you're getting already. I know your students are feeling that in lessons. And I think that's probably a little bit of like your secret sauce in all this
Yeah.
too, is that you're really kind of like wearing that on your sleeve and letting them see that excitement. I think it makes parents decide to work with you really quickly because they're pumped about how excited you are about the whole thing. So I mean, we'll definitely talk about that in a little bit too, but gosh, it's really cool to see your studio grow and how exciting that's been for you on the back end too, because I know it's just impacting your students in a really wonderful way. Well,
Yeah.
I want to like time leap for a second back to when we met in like the first half-ish of February of this year. So just kind of orient everyone to the timeline. It is the 1st of November right now. So it's been just over 8 months. So we're going to talk about this journey over the last 8 months, and I want to start at the very beginning. When you were building your studio back in February, what did things look like? How many students did we have enrolled at that point?
Yeah, so I had two inconsistent online students back in February, really not in person. They were from different places in the United States. And yeah, it was hard to teach that way. And I wanted so
Mm.
much more out of what I was doing.
What do you think, I know this is a little bit speculative, but what do you think led to some of the inconsistency in their scheduling and tuition?
Yeah, well, we're in a post-COVID world, right? So a lot of us who were teaching at the time moved to online. Some of us never moved back. And I was definitely one of those people up until recently where I'd been moving around. I'd gotten a couple degrees. I'd kept
Mm.
students through that, keeping them through the online teaching platforms. And so then I moved to Cincinnati and I really wanted to really teach, get back to my students in person. And I think, the online lessons are a great resource for students, but there's also a lot better ways to teach. And I
Mm.
wanted to be able to teach students to my full potential.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, it's hard too when we've had so much inconsistency over the last few years than to take a student that has been inconsistent and try to create more policies or kind of enforce policies to have them come on a weekly basis. It's tough. It's definitely a
Right.
challenge to get them to convert. So something we had talked about early was like opening up that space for new incoming students and then setting different expectations for them so they could be consistent and you could have
Right.
that stable income and revenue. What were some of the challenges that you were experiencing though? Because you were trying to build the studio at this point. It's not like we had
Hmm.
never considered doing any marketing or advertising and this was the first thing we did. What did you try before you and I started working together?
Well, I had just gotten married about a month prior to that. So I was also in the middle of changing my name. And so everyone knew me as my maiden name. And that was a little bit hard. So people wouldn't
Mm.
recognize when I would email them. Even if you tell them, people don't necessarily
Yeah.
recognize that. And so I had been, I'd been doing the cold calling emails, but I definitely wasn't approaching it in the best
Mm.
way. I was just like, "Hey, I teach lessons." But it's a little hard when people don't know who you are to just cold call people. And so yeah, I was doing a lot of that type of thing, just trying to get in anywhere, but it was so hard because I didn't know people. And that
Mm.
was, I think, what was making it so difficult.
Yeah. And you were taking a lot of action. I remember in that early conversation discussing the fact that you had reached out to a lot of schools, like no one was emailing you back, and that was really
Mhm.
frustrating. Understandably, like you're doing the thing that we're supposed to do and we're not getting the results that we're looking for. That changed pretty quickly once we started with That's in the Box. In this spring semester, so again, that was kind of early to mid-February. So I think we started sending emails in March,
Yes,
correct, to
yes.
school programs between March and the end of the school year. So like a month and a half, 2 months. How many school visits did you do?
Yeah, so I did 15 school visits in just those 2 months. 15.
Holy moly. It was chaos in a really, really good way.
Yes.
It was chaos.
Yes.
What do you think, you know, obviously we kind of know what tripped the trigger, but for the sake of everyone else that's listening, what do you
Mhm.
think was the difference in the first round of outreach that you just described and then the outreach that led to 15 school visits?
Right, yeah, so my approach the second time
Mm,
was completely different, right? Because before it was very much about me being like, "Hey, I teach lessons. Hi, hello, me, hi." Whereas the second time it was like, "Hey, what can I do to help you?" Right. And that created such a deeper relationship with these band directors. I can think of two straight off the bat that I visited early on, and there are now two schools I teach several students at. And those
mm,
band directors were just so happy to get someone in front of their students.
yeah,
They were just so thankful that I was willing to come and do that my own personal time to be there and give these students, free information.
yeah,
Right. So I think my approach just totally changing was the huge selling point for me.
yeah, absolutely. And it's really reflective of who you are as a person too, because as we're talking about the beginning, you do have a lot of joy and passion for this.
Yeah.
So once you're in front of students, it's just awesome. And finding that different approach that reflected that joy and passion and what you want to share obviously made a really big difference. Now, when you talk about building really strong relationships, what does that look like? Because in the relationships that you've built, especially in the few schools that you're working with more strategically this fall,
Mhm.
you have very close relationships with them. So how does that progress from like a cold email and a school visit in the spring to all of a sudden you have many students, especially on if we can be honest, more of a niche instrument, right?
Yes.
There's a
Yes.
smaller number at most programs of horn players in particular. So how do we develop such a strong relationship to make those numbers?
Right. Well, first I'll say because horn's a niche instrument, the band directors also very much want to get to know you. That
Mm,
is the
yeah,
one benefit because horn can be such a challenging instrument for young players.
yeah,
So they hear of a horn player, they really want to get to know you. But you have to make sure that is mutual on your end as well. So basically, what would happen was I would do this initial school visit and I would make sure I handed out materials to the students and make sure they got strong fundamental knowledge of the horn that always had more information than they even needed, right?
mm,
And so I'd make sure they had that, the band directors had that. And I think super important is the thank you note afterwards. Always, always, always need to send a thank you note. That is huge, especially for me. I don't care what it is. I always send a thank you note. And so thanking them, that continues the conversation, right?
absolutely.
So even though, because I was at a interesting point in the school year where not every band director could have me come in, right? Because it was the end of the year. They were doing like state evaluations and then they were doing exams and they were off for the summer. So because of that, I was like, hey, it was really great. I'd love to come in again next year when you have more time. And even through that time period, I continued to send resources to the band
Mm,
directors. Right. And so they take notice in that and they're thankful for that. Especially the ones who are, they have a lot less knowledge on that sometimes, right? So
yeah.
even the ones who do have, like, there's a couple band directors who are horn players who I teach as well. So everyone's just thankful to have those resources and have someone who truly cares for their students.
Yeah, I think that's such an important note that you just said. I think when we look at schools that we're reaching out to, I have a lot of teachers say, well, I couldn't possibly email such and such school because their band director's also, so I don't want to be conflicting with that. They might teach lessons outside of school. Maybe that's the case, but
Right.
also we don't know if we don't ask, right? And also, how many other, in my case, clarinet players are not emailing that school specifically for that reason. And so they're almost shut off to some of those resources. And just because they're a player themselves doesn't mean they're not stretched thin when they've got all of the other instruments in front of them in a band class. So I think that's such an
Right.
excellent, excellent point that It doesn't matter what the teacher's background is. We are a resource and a support system. We're not competition. That's not the
Right.
goal in any of this. And obviously, these relationships have led to students for you, but they've also led to other positions. I mean, you're teaching marching band this season at a few
Yeah.
schools. You have group classes where they're bringing you in on a weekly basis. Tell us a little bit more about what that looks like right now, because again, these are very developed relationships. You've worked really hard over the
Right.
last like 6 to 8 months to make that happen.
Right. Yeah. So like almost instantly I had one of my visits. They're like, "Hey, we need a horn teacher. We also need someone to teach marching band. Do you want to do that?" And I was like, "Absolutely." It had been
Yeah.
5 years since I taught marching band, but I was happy to do it because it meant I got to be in front of more kids. I love
Yep.
teaching music, right? So I got to be in front of more people, but also that meant like the kids who were marching mellophone, play horn, also actually got to see me, even if they weren't
Hmm.
able to see me in class, or it was just a helpful reminder, right?
Yep.
So that was another thing where it was like I could develop a face for these students. That happens a lot in my group classes. I'll have students who I'm teaching all these brand new sixth graders. They barely know how to play five notes right now and they're struggling. And then their parents hear about these group classes. They're like, "Well, do you like that person?" And they'll be like, "Oh, I love Miss Anna. She's the best." Because my students really do enjoy their time with me and I enjoy my time with them. So, because, I have these really great relationships,
Yeah.
students, teachers, that's what's growing. It's the relationships themselves. Like, money's great. I love money, and we'll talk about that. But I love the students and I love them learning. So,
Yeah.
these relationships are huge. Yeah.
Well, like I said, I think it's part of your quote unquote secret sauce. And it's something that is important to OTB when we're looking at working with someone too, is that there's a passion for the actual teaching side of things. Because you're right, the money is great and that's wonderful. And it is an important factor for sure. Like we had clear monetary goals. We had a
Right.
part-time job we were looking to potentially move on from. Like there were other factors in the planning. But when you approach it with that zeal for the kids and for learning, it comes through so clearly. And I just want to point out, like as a third party observation for anyone that's listening, at no point so far has Anna said that in building these relationships in the last 6 to 8 months, has she like flat out said to a director, please send me students? Right.
Right.
She like that's not part of the conversation. She's not saying, I'll come in and volunteer and then will you share my flyer in exchange? Like there's no there's no like exchange of service or exchange of information happening. It's just let me come in and help. And it's taking care of itself. Now, we are following up, and of course, we're in communication with
Right.
them and we're making them aware that we have openings in the studio so that they can help fill them. But at no point are you approaching them and just asking for students. And that's such a big shift in how we relate to someone and the relationship that we're trying to build, right? Different than what you were doing back in the winter for sure.
Absolutely. And now I've realized like the band directors don't have like control over their students taking lessons, right? So like
Yeah.
me being like, "Hey, I teach lessons," they could be, they're like,
Like that nice
"Okay,
for you.
great." Right? But that
Cool.
doesn't mean they have a student looking
Right.
either.
Right. And sometimes students don't know that they're looking until they actually meet you. I think that's an important factor too.
Right.
Like you were describing with the group classes that you're seeing a student on a regular basis. You're in that classroom on a almost weekly basis in most of these programs now. They're seeing you around, they're comfortable with you, they're excited about the results they're getting, and now they're thinking like, what else could I learn? This is really fun for me, and I am enjoying this process. I'm enjoying the instrument more because it's not so challenging, and band class is not so difficult for me, and we want to accelerate that a little bit more. So as you're creating that early win and that joy for them and you're making the instrument more accessible and giving them those fundamentals, it kind of opens up the possibility of like, what else can I do with this thing? This is
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I want to circle back just for 1 second to the beginning of our work together. How did
Mhm.
you originally hear about Outside the Box?
Yeah, okay, this is actually an interesting story. I saw a video of you with a friend of mine, Kate Warren, who we grew up both in Florida. And I hadn't paid any attention to it at the moment it came out. And then it kind of resurfaced a little
Mm.
bit later. And I was like, wait, what is this? And then I started looking into OTB more. I found a couple other people who I knew who had done the program. And then I saw a testimonial video for someone who I talk to regularly now from the same area. I was like, wow, wait, I live there. I can totally do that. And so it's just kind of like almost like a bunch of coincidences all at
Mm,
once. I was like, I need to do this. It's time.
mm. What is the thing? Because obviously we had some pretty long initial conversations talking through your studio and kind of developing a plan and knowing what we were going to do in our work together should that happen. What kind of kicked you over the fence, or what was the deciding factor for you in moving forward and signing up for the scale program?
Well, I think meeting you, I was like, okay, this is another person who, understands it, gets it,
Mm.
also has a deep passion for it, right? And like finding another person like that, I found to be a big deal, and I talked to my husband. I was like, I think I need to do this. And he's like, I think you should too. And, that was just kind of it. And now life's totally different.
Gosh, yeah, life does look a little different. We're going to talk about some numbers in a second too, because it is. I'm just so excited for you.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good. I also want to touch though before we get into some of the numbers.
Mhm.
What do you think has fueled some of this growth? So, what in the program did you find particularly valuable or helpful to kind of help accelerate? And you mentioned before we hit record, exponential growth was the really big thing that you were so excited about. So, what do you think has kicked off that exponential growth, and what have you found to be the most helpful and supportive for you?
Right. Well, so because I started the program in, February, I really had to take somewhat of a different approach, right?
Mm,
Because I had to work everything up like super slowly, get all my ducks in a row, do have all my resources, get my flyers, start Facebook posts, all these kinds of things had to be very slowly worked up. And, it hit a weird point where it's like, oh my gosh, is this going to work? But
mm,
that's because it was summer. Students don't always take lessons in the summer. We see less
yeah.
studio growth at that time,
We had things
right?
coming in spring and summer, but it was a lot slower. Like things were kind of
Right.
trickling in over time. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. I was getting a lead here, a lead there. I was getting students. They were all, my ideal type of student, which I figured out who my ideal student was. Right. And as time developed, then right before school started, I started hearing from all the band directors. And then that's when it took off. But it's because I had the resources
Mm,
already set up to have that growth and accept the growth.
yeah. We had talked about in one of those first meetings, school visits and these relationships being a long game. Do you remember that? Like, kind of breakdown of like what's our short game, like some things that we can do to get some fast students, like the long game, the strategy that we're going to use for success now, but also ongoing. And I think your story is such a perfect example of that long game. That yeah, things were happening in spring and summer. We were happy with the growth. I mean, I remember talking in like June and July, and you're like, yeah, like things are going well. It is growing. Another important factor that I want to just acknowledge right now, you are at a degree program currently or certificate program.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are other things happening in your life. So when we talk about the studio growth, this was one of many things that was on your plate at the time or
Right.
that were on your plate. And so we're happy with the growth, things are going well. We hit September and it blew up. I mean, it blew up. So when Anna says that band directors were contacting her and like hiring her for some of these group classes that we've been talking about, hiring her for marching band, of course, too. But more importantly, saying, I have X number of students that are interested in lessons or that would be a good fit for lessons and making those introductions. And all of a sudden the roster was just full, like in a
Right.
couple of weeks,
Mhm.
which was fun and also a little chaotic, right? It was a little stressful. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
Overwhelming. Yeah.
Yeah.
Overwhelming. Because all of a sudden it's like you have 20 students to teach. Fit them in your schedule.
Yep. Which was a little bit of a obstacle course that we were running, but also at
Right.
the same time, it was amazing to see that growth happen. And I think
Hmm.
maybe it's time to put some numbers around this because we're kind of dancing around it a little bit. When we started back in February, and I'm looking at the numbers we wrote down at the time too. We had the two inconsistent students, and we were like making a couple ish $100 a month when they
Hmm.
came. Obviously, it was a little inconsistent, so we weren't sure. What does revenue look like right now on November 1st?
November 1st with, all of my private teaching plus like my consistent group classes, we're at like $6,800.
Holy moly. Talk
Yeah.
about exponential. And well over half of that has come in the last 2 months. And that's where
Yes.
really where we're talking about that exponential growth. Like, it has pedal to the metal this fall grown in a really amazing way. It's so awesome. I'm so proud of you. And the persistence that you had in this, I think, is something also that I just want to call out, because that exponential growth happened specifically because of the relationships that you were building in the spring. You did those
Mhm.
15 visits. Not all 15 schools are schools that you have a strong relationship with right now. You did the 15, you found the couple that were the most important or that you felt the strongest about. And here we are now. How many schools are you working with on a regular basis?
So, schools that I am regularly at and visiting every single week is at 7
That's
schools. And
awesome.
I have school students that aren't even at all those schools too. So, but 7.
That's awesome. We often kind of say it usually takes about 4 to 6 schools to fill a studio. And I think this is a really good example of that too. That, part of your schedule is also filled with some of these group classes and things that you're running at schools, but it doesn't take 15,
Mm,
right?
no, no,
It just
definitely
takes the
not.
ones that are the most important. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, okay, studio's grown. We're really excited about that. I also want to talk about some of the enrollment numbers. So we have the 2 students. How many students do you have right now to have that kind of revenue in
Yeah.
private
Right
lessons
now.
specifically?
Yeah. Right now, my private lesson students, I have 32.
Fantastic. And
Yeah.
how many hours per week are you teaching in total?
About 18, 20 hours every single week. Yeah.
That's awesome. So not enormous amount of hours, because again, you are in a
Oh,
degree program right now. So it's not
right.
like we could take on 40 hours a week and we don't want to, right? That would be
Right.
absurd.
Yeah. Like if I was done with school, absolutely. 40, like 40 hours. Absolutely. Sure.
Well, and as we were talking about this like 2 weeks ago, like when we do graduate, yeah, there is a possibility that the studio continues to grow and we fill a few more spots. Maybe sitting around that 25, possibly up to 30 hours per week. But with the revenue that you have right now, we're also in a really comfortable spot.
Right.
How has this impacted your life? So, like, yay, we're
Mhm.
making money and that's exciting. Yay, we love the teaching and that's awesome. Outside of that, what else has been impacted by your studio growing?
Well, the money is great, right? But it's also like the relief that,
Mm,
comes with that that's super, super important. Like, as I go into my last semester of this arts diploma, I can pay that off on my own without loans for the first time ever. And that is such a big deal for someone who's been in college for 8 years and had to make payments with loans every single time. So it's
um,
a big deal. And I did that playing horn, you know, like the thing I went to school for.
Does it make you feel, oh God, I'm just so excited. That is a big deal. That is such a big deal. I mean,
Right.
degree programs, diploma programs, certificate programs, they are not cheap. They're not inexpensive.
Mm-mm.
And when you're in a diploma program, the options for like TA positions and support there are small. It's not always available to us. And so to have that flexibility and have that consistency and stability is just so amazing. And I'm so proud of you. And I'm so glad that you have that. You deserve it. You've worked your absolute tail off. But it is amazing to see that happen for you. Does it feel like after graduation, do things feel better now than they did 6 months ago, looking at what came in the aftermath of the diploma?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'll be crazy. Yeah. Cause then it's like, once that, once I can just really focus on teaching, then it's like, I can like live a life, like have a savings account, like a Roth IRA. Like that's things we don't get to think about
Yeah,
typically as freelancers. And the way the studio's been built up and there's a reliable source of income regularly, that's like a security that we don't learn about in music school,
mm,
right? And that's huge. It's huge because no one talks about this and we can create that security ourselves.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think one thing I want to just briefly touch on in that point is you have also utilized a flat monthly rate tuition to help
Mhm.
create more of that stability. When we look at the 2 students that we had previously, and obviously scale is a big part of this, we definitely have a
Right.
lot more on your plate right now. But do you think implementing that flat monthly rate tuition early made a difference? Do you think if you'd implemented it later, it would have been the same? How do you feel about where you did it in the process? Because you established those policies like day one and committed to them, even though the studio
Right.
wasn't growing at that point.
Yeah, one of the first things I did was write out those studio policies, which include the flat rate monthly tuition. It was something I had never thought about
Hmm.
ever. Like hadn't really heard about it until I started the program and then I started hearing more about it. But once I established that, I think that was huge because I was able to be so upfront and get used to it as
Hmm.
students started signing up. So then when I did have that huge influx of students, I was able to explain it very thoroughly to all of these parents who it was probably new for them too. And a lot of parents have actually thanked me for that because they find it so much easier.
Hmm.
Yeah,
It's consistent for their budget too. They don't have to
exactly.
guess at what they're going to owe you for next month.
Exactly.
Well, and you mentioned too right before this that you took a week off for fall break and that you had some
Hmm.
other time off and you weren't feeling well one day and you were able to cancel lessons, and having that flexibility starts to make this feel even a little bit more like salaried work,
Right.
which is also affirming. It doesn't feel like you have to like push through when you're not feeling well or you don't get time off because you need to teach and get the money. And especially when you're juggling a diploma program like this and you've got a lot on your plate, it's good to have the time off and to be able to take rests and not push just for the sake of pushing.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice as a person who regularly tries to do that.
The last thing I think I want to ask on this note, you are charging a little bit more of a premium rate for your
Mhm.
area, and that flat monthly rate tuition and even the hourly rate that we used to calculate that. How have you built confidence in quoting a rate to folks that is higher than what you were previous charging? My gosh, sorry. Higher than what you were previously charging.
Yeah. So I think it's just getting used to the expertise I know I have. Like
Mm,
when I look back on it, I've been teaching private lessons off and on really for 8 years, right? And I have a couple degrees, like I have a master's degree. And so I think understanding my potential is
mm,
really what makes me feel comfortable because I look young. Parents still confuse me for a student. Like it happens. I get it. I have a young looking face, but that doesn't mean I don't know what I'm doing. And
mhm.
as I work with these students and we hit these huge goals, I realize, I do know what I'm doing. Can absolutely do this. I've built the curriculum.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so the student's success is also my own. And, you know, it's absolutely them doing the work, but I also am putting in my own work with that. So
yeah,
as I get more comfortable with that, the rates also become more comfortable because I can say, I have a master's degree. I've been doing this. I know what I'm doing. And
yeah,
that's been a huge mind shift for me.
yeah. You've got the social proof to back it up. Like your students are getting good results. They love working with you, so it's easy to quote those rates. And the other thing too that you had mentioned before is like it just takes practice. Like you've said it to so many students now. Like you have 32 students enrolled, so that's a difference of 30 students over the
Right.
last 6 to 8 months. You've talked to more people than that. Not everyone has said
Yes.
yes. And
Yeah.
that's been okay because the studio still grew. We didn't need every single person to say yes at a lower rate. Having that premium rate is also how you've put up these incredible numbers and how the studio has grown this way as well. If you could give one piece of advice to past Anna, like back in
Mm.
January and February when things were a little frustrating, we were trying to figure out where to go next and how to make things happen a little bit faster. What is something that you wish she knew back then? Or maybe something that you want to share with people that are listening to this too?
Yeah. I would say don't hesitate and just
Mm,
do it. Yeah. I think I was like pretty scared of maybe it wouldn't work out, maybe I would hit all these roadblocks, but every time I hit a roadblock, I got past it as it progressed. And so really, advice I would have given myself and anyone who's thinking about it is don't hesitate and just try it.
that it does take it takes action and then it takes further refinement on that action, right?
Right.
You were putting the work in and we just had to like just little tweaks, tiny
Mhm.
little tweaks, and look where we are now. It's so exciting. It
Yeah.
really is. I think maybe final question before we wrap up is if someone's on the fence right now about OTB and that's why they're listening to this, right? They're trying to
Mhm.
decide like, is this program a good fit for me? Are the resources a good fit for me? Does this fit into my life? What would you say to kind of help them make that decision? Or again, maybe something that you think you wish you knew back then?
Hmm. Yeah. So OTB has helped me a lot. A lot, a lot. And I don't think I would have nearly as much success without the support from
Mm.
OTB. And so, especially if you're a person who feels like you're so close, you could
Mm.
just use like one tweak and it would kind of break the mold. Or even if it's like, okay, I've been doing this, I have 10 students, but I just can't get past 10 students, right? So if you're at like that breaking point almost, absolutely you should, even if you're not, do it. But that's kind of the point. And like I said, I watched one of these videos and then that was kind of one of my deciding factors
Mm.
too. Seeing someone just like me.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, thank you for sharing your story and kind of like
Yeah.
this feels so full circle to hear you say
Yeah.
hear you say that and now here we are and I'm so excited to celebrate all of your success. You have worked so hard and you've put in so much time and energy and care and passion into growing the studio and into working with these schools and building these relationships. Obviously, it's paying off, but you are really deserving of that. So, congratulations again. I'm so excited for
Thank
you.
you.
This is awesome. I know you're going to have a wonderful rest of the school year. And one more time, just thank you for sharing your entire journey. This has been wonderful working with you. So wonderful to kind of recap it today and revisit everything.
Yeah,
Thanks, Anna.
thank you.